Hi, this is Eric Durek, and welcome to Med Health Fit. This is the TV show that integrates wellness and healthcare. And we talk about a lot of different subjects in terms of wellness, but tonight we're going to lump them all into what I call sports medicine. And I am very happy to have as my guest Dr. Frank Katch. And Frank is the retired former chairman and graduate program director of the Department of Exercise Science at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. And you did your postdoc work right here at UCSB in the golden age of exercise science. Is that correct? Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yeah, it was like a pre-doc before that, before a lot of things that are now very important were begun at UCSB.
I just remember when I walked into your brother, Dr. Vic Katch, who was my professor at Michigan, when I walked into his office the very first day, I saw this picture of this university at night, and I said to him, where is that? That's the most unique, I mean, this is, this big pond in the front, and he says, it's UC Santa Barbara. And he told me a little bit about the story of how he worked, and he worked with Dr. Steve Horvath, who I actually did some studies with when I came here. And just totally enamored with the history of exercise science with Dr. D.B. Dill and A.V. Hill and all of these guys who did this work 100 years ago, and I meet this guy out at UCSB who was really one of the founders of the entire profession. And I got to study with your brother and got to know you, who are really like that first generation of the professor clan. And I consider myself sort of that second generation of the profession of exercise science, which I've always felt pretty honored to be a part of because, and correct me if I'm wrong, that I really think that exercise science, however you lump it, whether it's biomechanics, physiology, rehabilitation, whatever, is one of the more advanced and all-encompassing areas in health.
Yeah, I agree with you. Unfortunately, not a lot of people believe that because they get so concerned about their own little tiny area, and they explore that in depth, and they really don't see the interconnections with all of the other parts. Mm-hmm. And one of the nice things about exercise science is when you go and do an experiment, not only do you look at it from the one part that you might be interested in, let's say fat cells, and do they expand, do they shrink, do you lose them? You also look at the movement, you look at the biochemistry of it, you look at the neuromotor part of it, so you get a holistic approach and not just a single unitary aspect of what you might be interested in.
Which is what medicine, everyone's a specialist in medicine. Now, outside of the vast number of books and research publications, you've done 300 or 400 research publications, you've written dozens of books, which we'll talk a little bit here, but although you're not teaching and administering full-time, you've been a consultant to Bally's, you've been a consultant to the Boston Red Sox, which I want to talk about a little bit, the National Football League, the U.S. Army. You actually changed their protocol for physical field assessments, which must have been a Herculean task in and of itself to go to the U.S. Army and say, hey, you're not doing this right.
Well, they had us at the Eisenhower room where President Eisenhower died at Walter Reed. Mm-hmm. And they explained everything, what had gone on and how he had persisted, and they took us into this big room which was filled with all these flags from the different nations. And every one of our service branch was there along with the Surgeon General and their people under that, and they asked a group of us, like, what would you change if you could do something that would help the United States Army and the military in general improve their health and fitness? And so we discussed that for several days, and we came up with a suggestion which they eventually adopted, and that was weight standards, where guys became sedentary, they were no longer fit, they couldn't do their job, and so the military decided, if you can't make these standards, we're going to give you 6 months to a year to shape up, or lose your commission.
Good.
And you're out.
Good. Well, and that reminds me of something, and I know that you'll be able to expound on this. I don't know which exercise physiologist, I'm thinking it maybe was A.V. Hill, who invented K rations during World War II. That was an exercise physiologist.
It was a very famous guy. His picture was on the cover of Time magazine. His name was Ansel Keys.
Dr. Keys.
And Dr. Keys for K for the K ration, and he was in the physiological hygiene department at Minnesota, which they did a lot of work. And they, as a matter of fact, did the most famous study called The Biology of Human Starvation. It's 2 volumes thick.
Wow.
About conscientious, objectors, and they followed them, the psychology, the chemistry, the physiology, the fitness, to see what would happen to these guys on reduced rations. They're really an interesting study.
Well, most of the really, really interesting stuff, and again, from Dr. Horvath out here, I got a chance to spend some time with him at his office years ago, and just to sort of chat with him about what, he went to the Andes Mountains and he studied altitude. He worked with the Department of Navy, and he did his hyperbaric chamber, and he did cigarette testing, and it's like he did everything. It's like when I tell people that I'm sort of the end point of the golden age of the exercise profession, and most people say, whatever. I say, well, tell me what the golden age of medicine was. And they're like, oh, I don't know. Tell me what the golden, they don't know. They said this is where some of the best research was done. Now, you've been out of formal academics for a few years, but you still have a huge involvement in sports medicine. Where do you think, based on, because you have such a huge aspect of this knowledge from the golden era, where do you see that sports medicine is going, sort of in general?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, we could spend a lot of time. I'd say one of the things that would be useful to a lot of people is the smartwatch. And Apple pioneered
wearables, right?
The wearables, and the whole idea of being involved with the wearable, the new technologies that are monitoring the heart rate and the breathing. They have sensors that can go under the skin to measure glucose. There is so much going on. And a company like Apple, who has now tested something like 66,000 hours on 20 different treadmills going at the same time. There's a lot of work going on. And so what's stuffed into their wearables and their watch, and the other companies just haven't done this, you can really depend on the data. And so it's really a unique thing. And what I think they're counting on is the socialization aspect of it. So for someone who wants to become more active, if you and we're the same age, I know you're a lot younger than me.
A couple of years anyway.
Yeah, a couple of years. You would, let's say, if you've walked and run 3 miles in the day, and I look at it and I'm up to a mile, and I'm competitive with you, I'm going to start moving again. So the social part of it is really important, and that's part of the success for the wearables, and getting into nutrition and diet and exercise and resistance training and yoga and breathing and all that sort of stuff.
Well, my go-to app for my cycling here is Strava. And whenever I log in, hey, I did Old San Marcos, so I did a 2-hour ride through Montecito, or I did something or another. Sure as shooting, that night on Facebook, I'll get 3 or 4 people that said, hey, I'm following you. Hey, you did a great ride today. So there is a social component, even though I don't think about that when I'm riding. People are looking at this kind of stuff. So I really think that you are spot on with the whole wearable thing, and just all of the data analytics that are going to, and if they can make it fun, that's how they're going to get more people to exercise. So
I log into this one site. It's called Human, and I started a club, and it was called Herbie's Club. That's another story, but Herbie's Club now consists of me, my 2 sons, my daughter, and a couple of other people. And they log in, it automatically tracks what you've done. And if I see that my daughter has sloughed it because she's a doctor and didn't get a chance to go out, she'll look at it and she'll text me and say, hey, I forgot, I couldn't get out today. I know you won, but you only won because I didn't get out. So it really has a social aspect, and I did it because I'd like the family to really be conscious of the physical activity part of it.
Fantastic.
And the necessity to keep that up forever.
Forever. Well, yeah. You're here in Santa Barbara. You've been here for at least a decade now, right? 15 years?
Yeah, I think we came at the time of 9/11.
Okay, so about 15 to 17 years, and there are a lot of one of the big things that I've seen both in Santa Barbara, in LA area, the Bay Area, etc., are functional performance centers. Now we have one here called P3, which I know Dr. Marcus Elliott. There's cross training, there's HIIT training, there's all these other types of conditioning, and interestingly enough, I was doing that kind of training because of my track and field stuff years ago, intervals and all those other things. this is the conditioning that they're trying to move people to, that long, slow distance. That's not in favor anymore. Pro or con from Dr. Katch? Thumbs up or thumbs down?
No, the long, slow distances, I mean, the primary requirement is for people to get out and be physically active. Right. That, for me, is like the most important thing. You don't have to be a world-class athlete. You can do at a moderate pace, not the kibitzing walk, but a purposeful walk or purposeful hike, or do something with physical activity all day long, every day, all the time. But for those that want to improve the heart and the cardiovascular system in particular, the new kind of training called the high-intensity interval training, the HIIT training, is really good to go hard for a short amount of time and then repeat it, as long as you have a rest interval.
Right.
Because there's an important concept in exercise physiology, and that's called the exercise to rest ratio. So if you want, let's just take something that, let's take sit-ups. If I asked you to do 200 sit-ups in a row, or anybody to do 200, you probably couldn't do it. But if you did 5, and then took a 15-second rest, and then did another 5, and at the end of whatever the time is, you would get pretty close to that goal.
Right.
And then the idea would be to group them together to start to do 7 sit-ups and cut down the time interval. And the same with HIIT training. You go all out as hard as you can, and then you rest.
Right.
So if you're cycling, you push, maybe you're going at 120 RPMs at a minute. And then during the rest period, maybe you take it down to 60, which is still pretty good. And then you go for your 30-second rest period, and then you go again.
Right.
And you only need to do that for about 5 or 6 minutes, and you get almost the identical benefits as doing the longer slow distance for 30 minutes or 50 minutes or an hour. So I think that's a real trend.
Well, and interestingly enough, and I'm going to segue this into my next question, is that when I started working with cancer patients 25 years ago, the only author who was working in the field of sports medicine was a woman in Utah named Dr. Merrill Winningham. And I had the good fortune to speak with her the last year of her life. She passed away from cancer in 2001 or 2002, and we were on the phone quite a bit that year. But her first groups of papers were all about interval training. And she called it not HIIT training, she called it weight training. Winningham Aerobic Interval Training,
nice.
The weight protocol. And it was walk and rest, walk and rest. And for a cancer survivor or a cancer patient, your exercise portion may only be 15 seconds of walking or stretching or whatever you're doing, and then you have to work on the work to rest ratio. So she was one of the first people that actually took this interval concept, which was Dr. Ostron, 1961, and she put that into the world of medical exercise. And I think she was the first. She was so far ahead of her time. She understood the concept of interval training for people who had such low functional ability. So, go ahead.
Good point. And well, I was
Go
going to
ahead.
say, when I was my first teaching job and I was at Queens College, we started something called aerobic circuit training, where we did all kinds of different exercises. It would be jumping jacks and flexibility and stretching and moving around in a circuit from machine to machine, running to one building, resting, going to the next building, and up to about an hour of time.
So you invented circuit training.
No, I don't think so.
I think you did.
No, circuit training.
You can take credit.
No, it was brought over from Australia, actually.
Okay.
And at Berkeley, when we were there in '67, a long time ago, to '70, at the Harmon Gym, this old gym, they had 10 exercise stations around where people would go down, but where they would go down to their seats, and you could put weights at one, you could put dumbbells at another one, you could put a sit-up bench at another one, and the idea was to run from one station to the next, to the next, to the next, and do 10 circuits.
Wow.
So that's where that circuit training came, and the guys who were at Cal in my day, the original guys, we call them, did that circuit training, and that's where it really took off. And then there was a program started at UCLA, and then it went to Davis, and then guys who graduated went back east, and so things kind of spread around. So that was.
But again, sort of before now, everyone's doing it.
Yeah,
I mean, you can't walk into a functional training center. So speaking about cancer patients, I started my career after I left the University of Michigan. I worked in New York City for a year in corporate fitness, and then came out here to Santa Barbara to work in medical research at Sansum, and worked with diabetic folks, people with metabolic disorders, pregnant women. Then I moved into cancer, and then I moved to people with renal disease. And so most of my first 10 years of my career were working with these people who had medical conditions. And I'm starting to see now that a lot of these certification agencies and health clubs and these studios and whatever are all kind of branching out into this whole functional fitness for seniors, for medical conditions. There's a new group out of Los Angeles called the Medical Fitness Network. They're trying to create a national body of certified trainers who do nothing but work in medical conditions. How important is this going to be based on the sort of state of medicine in the United States today?
Well, I mean, you're opening a can of worms, because when you check on the credentials of the people that run some of these programs, you would just be aghast.
Well, I've certified some of them, and the question, I don't want to get into the whole state of the industry, because you're right, it's a battlefield. But my thing is the shifting from when I was in corporate wellness, and then when you looked at health clubs in the 80s and the 90s, it was mostly 30 to 40-year-olds, it was executives, it was housewives, it was whatever. And all of a sudden, this program called Silver Sneakers came into being. And I knew the folks who started it. And all of a sudden, there was this shift to all these seniors from their health plans or whatever, starting to do these programs. Now, Silver Sneakers has over 13,000 health clubs in the United States that offer this program through Medicare Advantage, Medicare Plus Choice. This trend is moving in that direction, whether you think personal trainers are qualified or not. It's still moving in that direction. In general, though, good or bad, just getting these types of folks to exercise.
Oh, I think it's fantastic. Anytime a large organization can set up policy where you can actually engage people who have been sedentary for such a long period of time, and then all of a sudden they get sick or they don't feel well, and then they have their moment where they say, oh, I better start to lose weight, I better start to get fit, I'm gonna drop dead if I don't take care of myself. So that kind of an approach, I think, is extremely beneficial. And I wasn't gonna say just about the certifications, it's upping the knowledge base of the people who run these programs, that they tie in to people like yourself and people like me who've been around the block when it comes to trying to establish the knowledge base and give them some basis for what they're doing. Otherwise, it's like, what are you doing?
No, I mean, and most of my career, I've been involved with licensure issues. I've done it at the state level. I was part of a bill in the late 1980s, early 90s to license personal trainers, which I've since moved the other way. I wrote a book in medical insurance reimbursement. I tried to sort of bridge this gap. I've worked with a number of certification agencies, but absolutely, and I do think that there are groups of people right now who are really trying to up the knowledge level. And I just think if everyone read your book, right here, and I'm going to sort of turn right here, and I'm going to make a plug for, in my first semester in college, and I had your brother as my exercise physiology professor, I had the first edition of this book, and I'm going to hold it up here.
Oh, you're really old.
I am really old. I am so old. Did you say something to me? No. Anyway, but now this is the 8th edition. It's like 10,000 pages. And how many chapters?
There are 33 chapters.
33 chapters. And you've got everything in here, from the history of physical education to metabolic disorders to functional training to strength training to aging to what you said, my favorite chapter, biochemistry and all of that good stuff. Lots of Krebs cycle in there. But I mean, just amazing amount. And again, it's the best-selling textbook in the history of exercise physiology, correct?
That's what they say, so that's, I hope it keeps going.
Well, like I say, 20 years ago when I was sitting at a former professor's house and you were telling me how much you sold, and I'm like running the numbers in my head, hey, he does pretty good on this, and you have 3 authors, and tell me, now your brother has retired.
He just retired.
And what about Dr. McArdle, Bill McArdle?
Oh, he's retired too.
Retired?
Yeah, he does.
A bunch of old retired guys just writing all this. The authors here, you're going to be like Hemingway.
It is so hard to keep up. Just by an example, about 10 years ago, we started tracking words used in the literature. So let's take something like a gene. A gene.
A gene, like gene
DNA,
splicing, DNA genes.
So
okay.
we put the word gene and then looked it up, how many times it was cited in the literature relative to our field. And there was something like 112 or 114 designations towards gene, and I thought, geez, that's not a lot. So we picked out about 10 common words in the biochemistry of exercise, strength exercise, and started to chronicle them with every edition. So in last year, when we looked up gene plus the word exercise, there were over 1,500,000 citations. And so when people ask, like, how do you keep up? And you don't. You just do the best you can. You read some of the best journals, and you try and skim the best that you possibly can, because it's impossible.
When I was in Ann Arbor, I went to my first multi-level marketing thing about nutrition. It was a new nutrition company. It was called United Sciences of America. And I didn't join the company because they were only around for a few years. But one thing that enthralled me as a graduate student, this guy said, we have a database of over 500,000 research articles on nutrition. And I thought, well, before the internet, I thought 500,000, that's a lot. Well, there must be 500 million citations now on nutrition, if you looked at everything.
It's hard to keep up. You don't know what to believe anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well, with the time we got left, I'm going to talk a little bit more. Now, you have your sports nutrition book, and this is also 4th edition. This has been around for quite a few years as well, too.
We're just publishing the 5th edition coming out. So
this is coming up on the 5th edition.
Yeah, this will be the 5th. We're going to start the 9th of this one.
And then
the Essentials just came out.
And this is more of a laboratory type book, right? It's like this, but it's paperback, but it's
really hard at the university level to cover all of these chapters. So people pick and choose for a 10 or 15 week course. This one is a lot easier to do, so it's a pared down version of that.
Cliff Notes version. See, no one knows what Cliff Notes is anymore. That's how old I am, Frank.
Yeah, I remember all too well.
Oh my goodness. All right, so I want to kind of talk a little bit about, you were a professor for how many years? 30 years? 31 years?
Yeah, I started in 1970 at Queens College.
Where I used to live by when I was in
Really?
New York. I lived in Flushing. I used to train on their track. Yeah. I was a New Yorker. Anyway, and I remember a few years ago reading that Purdue University was starting to do work in certifications. And when I asked you the question beforehand, you said that UCLA is now trying to come up with like a certification or group of certifications. And my issue is, because I know that you did work with a local certification company and have done consulting with other ones, is that in the 1980s, there were no certification companies. Now, there's 200 of them in the industry. My question is this the fault of the programs, or is this just a natural evolution of where fitness and exercise education has gone?
Well, let me give you one little example. So, and I'm not going to name the company, but I was down in Los Angeles, and I was on a tour of fitness centers, and I happened to go into one building, and there was a sign on the outside, and it said, "Become a personal trainer overnight."
There you go.
And so I looked at it, and it said, "Fill out this form and call it in." So I got the form, and there were 10 questions.
My name is Frank.
And the 10 questions were very easy, and they said, if you pass 9 out of 10, tomorrow you can start working on in our fitness center as a certified personal trainer. And I thought, what is this world coming to? It was just awful. And I think there's a lot of guys who, and men and women, who see a tremendous monetary rainbow at the end. And so a lot of these companies proliferate. They'll hire just about anybody, ex-jocks, whatever, whether they've had courses or not, military. That's all good, but if you don't have the knowledge, and the first person that comes in and says, geez, I haven't been exercising in a long time, is there anything I should be watching out for? And I remember being on the board of Bally Health and Tennis, and I got a call at 2 o'clock in the morning from a lawyer in Chicago, and he said, sorry to bother you, a guy just dropped dead this afternoon because he was 360 pounds, he hadn't had a physician clearance. The personal trainer who went to give him his exercise routine had him run all out on the treadmill, all out, with no warm-up, nothing, and he dropped dead. He said, is there a way that we're going to be able to defend it? And I said, no. I said, it's negligence of the highest order. He says, nothing at all. I go, nothing at all.
Well, I remember that was at Crunch Fitness in New York where the woman who was on a hypertensive med had the protein supplement or whatever he gave to her, and then also a very strenuous exercise program, and did not monitor blood pressure as often as he should. And you're right, and we do hear these horror stories, but I'm always, as a person who's been in the industry now over 30 years and have basically seen the evolution of the certification industry, I think that they've gotten a lot better than they were.
Yes.
And you're right, they'll always have some of these issues, but with the Medical Fitness Network and some of these other companies that are moving in the medical direction, I see that there will be change. It may be another 10 years to get to a point where someone like you is satisfied.
Yeah,
but you're hardcore, Frank.
Yeah, but I think a lot of the companies now realize that, people have to be competent at what they're doing.
Right.
And, having a college degree in kinesiology or in sports science or in exercise science, that's like a minimum requirement. Like, why wouldn't you have that? Because all of that knowledge combines with your athletic background, with your teaching, with your personality and all of that to make you an effective communicator. If you don't have knowledge, you don't have a lot going.
Yeah. Well, in the knowledge aspect, and I always come back to you when we talk about how influential your brother was in my education. I had one person as an undergraduate, and you may have heard about this woman. Her name was Jean Sion, and she was my anatomy and physiology professor at Eastern Michigan. And she was also my kinesiology teacher, and I wound up teaching for her for 2 years.
Oh, good.
As her laboratory assistant for 2 years anatomy, and in those 2 years, her 38 years as a professor, she had the highest scores in those 38 years. But your brother said some things about the professionalism and the ability to communicate and just learning about some stuff that I felt was tremendous. So with the minute and a half that we have left, give me some final words of wisdom from who I may consider the first generation of the exercise physiology professors.
Well, I would say that physical activity is extremely important. Moderation in what you eat, get a good night's sleep, make sure you go to a doctor once a year at least, know all of your values for cholesterol and blood pressure and all of the other things, because as you get older, and you will find this out,
Already been there.
things start to decline, and you have to take charge of yourself, because if you don't, not many people are going to do it, and the medical profession would love to have people very physically active for as long as humanly possible.
Excellent.
And that only might be 20, 30 minutes a day.
And we'll actually have you back on another show, because I want to talk about some other things. But we're coming to a close. This is Eric Durack for Med Health Fit. I'd like to thank our guest, Dr. Frank Katch, and we'll see you next time on Med Health Fit, medhealthfit.com.